Hello, and welcome to our fifth and final day of YOUniverse and our fourth and final day of our speaker series in YOUniverse. I gotta say, I don't know about you, but these last 4 days of content have just been legendary. We got our minds blown by an exceptional panel the first day talking about the future and how it is personal experience. We rounded things out about talking about sales reps and how selling is all about being personal today. We then thread the needle through to our friends over in marketing, spend some time talking about how to take your trade shows from trade show to trade woe, spend some time talking about demand gen, and we would be remiss here at Alyce if we didn't spend some time talking about CX, or customer experience, and how CX and PX play with one another. So I am thrilled to be welcoming our two guests today. I'm going to share my screen real fast and do their intros. Come on, Zoom, work with me here. There we go. Fabulous. Let me know. Can you guys see your title screens? If we good?
It's closing in.
We're almost there.
Almost feel it.
It's coming.
Come on, Zoom. You've been so good with us for this week.
I know. Zoom is like, I'm working so hard. I'm trying.
Zoom's not feeling it. Not feeling it. They're like, you know, you've been working me too hard. It's been 4 days of this stuff.
It's Friday.
I'm tired. It's Friday. Let's try a different way. We'll do it this way. I'll share my screen and then I'll present from here. How about now? Does that look good? Mm-hmm. We're in. Perfect. We did it. Congratulations. Go me. Anyway, this fourth and final session of our speaker series is all about PX and how it is the missing link to CX. I am thrilled to be welcoming these two guests. First, we have Sonciary, who is the co-founder and CEO now of Quala. But by night, she's spending her time running and building and drinking a lot of tea. Sonciary, you're calling in from New Hampshire. It looks lovely where you are right now.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm in Amherst, New Hampshire, about an hour north of Boston. Not too bad to quarantine here. It's been, you know, okay.
Nice. And I saw that a post on LinkedIn that you did, was it 100 miles? You ran 100 miles?
Yes. Now the caveat to this, it's not that impressive. I promise you. It was over like, no, I'm just kidding. It was over 5 days. So basically we ran hut to hut from the different huts in the Rockies, in the Colorado Rockies. So it was an insane amount of vertical, and getting used to the altitude was really interesting. But I loved it. I was out there in my element, and there was a group of like 8 of us, and we did, I don't know, anywhere from 20 to 25-ish miles a day. And it was beautiful. I absolutely loved it.
Nice. I'm so jealous. First off, of the fact that you had the stamina to do that day to day, and you also had the discipline to do that. I think that's tough work right there.
I joke that it was just a moving buffet. So, you know, you would like run a few miles and then you would just eat a ton of food, and then run a few miles and eat some more food. So really I was in my element. I was like in the mountains. I was putting one foot in front of the other, and then I just got to eat a ton of delicious meals.
Nice. Excellent. Well, I hope they had peanut butter there, because the other member of the team joining today's conversation is a peanut butter enthusiast. Although it doesn't say it here on his 5 to 9. This guy can put back a lot of peanut butter. This is Greg, who is the co-founder and CEO here, the founder and CEO here at Alyce, where he spends his time not just cranking back some peanut butter, but he also spends his time working out and spending time with his 3-nager, which is the first time when I met you and Zoe, it was the first time I'd ever heard that term before.
Interesting. My wife actually introduced it to me, so it is a new one to me as well, but I understand what it means now, and she's about to turn 4, so I'm trying to figure out what 4 is going to be next.
While you're figuring that out, I want to ask a little quick question about the post you had on LinkedIn recently about shredding with John Mayer. What happened? Like, it fell through. What happened?
I know. It's fun. I had so many LinkedIn emails about that after. So, you know, he grew up in Fairfield, Connecticut, which is where I grew up, you know, or close to that. And my buddy Dave was a cashier with him at the mobile station that was at the corner. And my buddy Dave was always, you know, I just would sit around playing guitar all the time. And he was like, this guy, John, he just like sits there and he doesn't talk to customers. He just sits in the back talking about wanting to write girly songs all the time. And that's what he says, he's going to become a millionaire. And he's like, you've got to meet this guy. You got to play guitar with him. And then I just was too shy. You know, I came out in in like college is like full blossom, but but in high school I was just like, not going to happen. So it fell through, unfortunately. And as I said in the LinkedIn post, I think he made out okay, playing small events, it's totally
Where
fine.
is he now? Where is that dude now? We don't know.
I don't know. Poor
I
guy.
don't know, yeah. He's
Really
so sad.
So sad. Too bad. So sad
So
for John Mayer. It didn't really work
Yeah.
out. But the good news is for you and for us here at Alyce, things worked out perfectly for you.
Yes.
To help pave the way to start talking about all things CX and PX. So with that said, I'm going to bow out of this conversation and let you guys both do your thing. I'll pop back in about 10 minutes past towards the top of the hour here, get some questions in here, but you guys let it rip.
All right. Something what's funny is you're talking about the running hut to hut. There's some crazy race here in Boston. I think it's in Boston. I think it's other places where it's like the hot dog 5K, where every 1K that you run, you have to eat a hot dog. I think it's even a beer too, or something like that. I'm like, that's the opposite of running, 100 miles, from hut to hut, having to eat a bunch of stuff that's there. So I had that as my picture in my head, but obviously that's not exactly how it probably went for you.
Maybe I have the iron gullet to do something like that, though. I mean, I was definitely eating a lot during those 5 days, but I was also strangely euphoric all of the time. I think when you just have sugar coursing through your veins constantly, like, it can't be a bad day.
No, I don't think so at all. All right, we'll stop talking about hot dogs and beer, and we'll get to it. So you and I have bantered a lot, obviously. We've gone back and forth. And I think the first place we should start when you're talking about CX is actually you giving a definition of what does CX mean to you? And then we can sort of pick up from there, because I think folks have different definitions. I think CX is one of those terms and one of the topics that people bring up a lot, but people don't really understand the full breadth of what does that mean. So let's start there, and then we can, pick it up from there.
Yeah, I love it. So I think traditionally the way we've looked at customer experience, if we were to sort of boil it down and not to distill it into its boring sense, but it's really the pathway that people follow along as they learn about our company, our products and our services, then maybe enter in some sort of education or selling stage. Maybe hopefully we have the opportunity to work with them, they become a customer, and then it's that process through post-sales that they flow through up until renewal, if your company has the notion of a renewal, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really just all of those stages within the journey. It feels to me to be a very clinical way to describe customer experience. I think a lot of us now are moving towards looking at customer experience as the emotional points that our customers go through in order to understand who we are and give us an opportunity to understand who they are, so we can better know how to provide value, what that value looks like, and how our customers like to experience that value. So for me personally, and I don't know if this resonates with you or anyone else here on the call with us, it really for me is very emotionally driven. What are the emotions we want customers to be experiencing as they move through that journey in those stages?
Yeah, it's funny, the word experience is sort of this very broad term, right? And even as we're talking about personal experience and we're unveiling this, as part of this whole YOUniverse conference here, what do you mean? What's the difference to you between, experience versus the journey, right? And you just said sort of experience has the emotional aspects of this, but there's more to an experience than just like having an emotional, reaction to that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, and then I'll chime in with how we're defining PX and where we feel like that PX is that missing link of CX, and then, go.
Yeah, I would love that. So the idea of CX versus journey mapping. I think that in some cases they are one and the same, but how I would look at them, or the lenses I would look at them through, is that CX really for me, since it has that emotional component for me and many others, those are the stages or descriptions that you use that help you understand how your customers feel about moving through that flow. And journey mapping, or customer journey, to me and to many others, is more about how we, our company, describe the stages that they go through. So we understand, how do we automate around those stages? How do we make sure that they are personal and not just personalized? And I know you and I have talked a lot about that.
We're going to go off on that one.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. And where can we delight and create connections? So that's how I look. I feel like journey is more company facing, and how we clinically look at how those things occur and where we want to measure around those points. And then CX for me is still very customer facing and emotionally facing.
Yeah, it's funny. The journey to me, even when you're talking about it, whether it's a sales funnel or whether it's the customer experience, the journey is sort of the hurdles, right? That you're actually trying to take, and that's the company centric view. as to how you're thinking about taking somebody through that process. But that's not the forward facing or the customer facing view that they see, which is a very different, opinion and perception that they're actually getting across that. So I still want to define, what the experience is. Like, what are the things that you would say that feed into creating that experience and creating that emotional, resonance and connection with them, at that time?
Yeah. So I think this is where we start to talk about CX and NPX. And how I look at those two different things is I understand that my customers are following, they're going through the flows, the stages, the journey, the experience, depending on who we're talking to and how we're talking about those things. But the idea of PX is really, to me, and you guys introduced this, this is an idea that you had that I absolutely love and completely latched onto, because I feel like it personally gave me a language to describe where I and my team sort of fit into the value discussion. So when we think about the value discussion, I look at the product created or generated value, and I look at the relationship created or generated value, and understand that both of them are unique and very important to understand and to measure, so that we know, look, our customers get value not only from our products, but the relationships that they have with our team members, whether it's marketing, support, services, success, engineering, product, whatever. Those valued relationships are really important to the emotional connection component. So those are the two pieces that I look at as I'm looking at this notion of CX and PX, and product-driven value and relationship-driven value.
Yeah, I totally agree. So to define PX, just especially for the folks that are listening in right now, the way that I look at CX is it's the customer view, right? So a customer has an experience from end to end. But the thing that people miss out on is the fact that the customer and the vendor, the folks that are actually responsible for that experience, have many people on each side, right? So you have your sales rep, you have your AM, you have your CS person, you have your implementation specialist, you have your lawyers, whatever it might be on the vendor side, and you have all of the users, the advocates, the executive buyers, the influencers, the users of the customer on this side. And what you have to understand is that the individual relationships that they make with each other is what personal experience is all about. And there's an experience from end to end that are created by all these moments that happen inside of there. And those moments are then, what we call, has the 3 R's, which are like, you have to create a moment by being, relatable, meaning like the 5 to 9 is what we call it, right? It's about their interests, their hobbies. Like we're talking about, hot dog and beer races, which is amazing. Obviously we're both going to do that because that's what we both are totally ready to do. You have the relevancy, right? Which is the second R, which is about the 9 to 5. Where are you in terms of the relationship, not the relationship, but the actual account, what's happening with that account on the 9 to 5, what are their goals or their success factors, all those things, and how you're actually being respectful at each one of those moments through each of the channels that you're actually trying to target them with. And if you have many of these personal experiences, meaning one-to-one relationships with each of those folks on the vendor side and the customer side, that feeds up to an amazing customer experience.
Yes.
Right. So that's the thing. So when you're talking about emotion, I don't see the emotion being on the CX level. I see it being on the PX level, right? Because the 5 to 9 is where you get that emotional resonance that's being created because you're actually being relatable. Like we're relating over, crazy races that we're talking about right now and all the other fun stuff that we've discussed, in previous conversations, but the trust factor and all the other stuff comes in from us being able to talk from, the relevancy side, meaning what stage are you in? Like if you're a CS person and you don't know exactly like what the utilization is of a product and something, and the person's trying to ask you for help, then how are you supposed to actually have trust, with that person? That's a bad moment. That's a bad negative detractor from the personal experience.
Yeah, I think you make a good point, and how I might challenge it, although I fundamentally agree. Like most of the emotion, and this might be me clicking, so let me just do this so it's not hitting. Let's talk about the emotional component, because I do believe fundamentally it is mostly created by the personal experiences that we have between our teams and our customers, and those are incredibly valuable. I've made an entire amazing life based on these relationships that my team's been able to build with prospects and customers. So I'm all about it. I do feel like some emotional connection can be driven by CX or by the product experience and flow when you have amazing marketers that are using language that's human language, that, that's humanizing, that makes sense, that's not clinical, that's not dry, has, alphabet soup where no one remembers what that means. And I've been very closely watching your team, and I'm learning from your team as you guys promote the customers that you're working with and the events like YOUniverse that you're putting on. I've watched your language. I've watched your use of emojis. I've watched how you talk about what you do. And I feel very emotionally connected. That's in addition to this heightened opportunity I have to talk with you guys today and all the calls that we've had before this, fireside chat, where it just helps solidify the fact that I'm experiencing this Alyce persona. I've connected with it. I feel emotionally connected with it. And now I'm seeing how each person is creating that by my individual connective bonding that's happening between us. And that's just like, that's where the magic happens.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you mentioned that because no, of course. I think the thing you bring up is a really important one, which is you can still have the emotional connection through the product. Like those moments don't have to be, I'm literally talking to you face to face over Zoom, right? Mm-hmm. Because you have these different channels of communication that you're using all throughout CX. Like for example, you and I were talking about this, last week or the week before. Like one of the ideas and one of the concepts that you has is how much of a personal experience or moment can you create with those specific individuals? So for example, if you're inside of an app, and it's and the UI is there and you have somebody pop up and instead it's just like, hey, check out our new feature, right? You can have language in there that has some emotive reaction to something because you can get a feel for like humor, or you can get a feel for, like the personality or the tone that, somebody in the brand world, actually drove down from there. Like I think Slack does a really good job at that, for example. But you take it another step further and you want to get to, again, what we're talking about is you want to go from one to many to one to one. You create emotional resonance if you can get to the more one-to-one you get, the more of a psychological and emotional connection and resonance you actually create between those two things. So like what happens if that pops up and actually your CSM, even if it's a video that's just talking about the feature and not directly saying, hey, Sonciary, I wanted you to check out this new feature, but like, hey, I just want to tell you about something I'm super excited about. Now there's a face to it. Now you have a video that's connected to it, right? So that is the path that we're trying to get people to take or taking people down, which is move from one to many to as much one-to-one as possible. And there's grades of how you can actually get there based on how much data you have and all the other stuff that can play with that too.
Yeah. I think the language that you use there is so important. And I'm actually learning this from a member of my team, Jenna Kluger, our director of growth. Hello. When she talks about our products, she uses a lot of language that's like, my favorite thing about this is this. Or the thing I love to do most with X, Y, and Z is this. And it makes me feel, I watch these calls that she's on, it makes me feel very connected to how she's experiencing the product. And I believe her, and that personal sharing, I think, is so incredibly important. So, we talk about this idea of being personal. It doesn't always it's not one way. It's not just your customers being extremely personal with you. It's you also leading first and showing that this is the environment that you're creating, one of honesty. And we talk about transparency, and I know those are buzzwords, but really it's you embracing who you are and the things that you love about your life and your job and your role and the products you're working on. And then talking about that so that other people can understand what connects you, what's value driven from your perspective, and they can maybe take on that understanding and then share what's valuable for them.
Yeah. As you're talking about that, one of the things that comes to my mind is thinking about high touch versus low touch, right? And I think there's a big difference in how you can actually create that emotion throughout the customer experience and personal experience moments, right? How do you judge and how do you think about it in terms of, the high touch world, and maybe define that for folks too, just so they can understand the difference between like high touch, customer experience versus low touch. And that's typically thought of as like enterprise versus self-serve or transactional. So just maybe define that, in your words. And then I think it's good to start digging in a little bit deeper, more actionable as to like how you can, be personal and how you can actually create that emotional connection there too.
Yeah. Let's talk about the idea of high touch versus low touch, or high touch versus high scale. Different people talk about it a little differently, but it's the idea. I think that language is primarily based around the number of connections that you intend or will have with your customers. So if you're on the enterprise side, it's likely that you're connecting with them maybe once a week, maybe several times a week, maybe once a month. Every company defines that for themselves. Or if you're in the SMB high scale space, then maybe you're talking to a customer once every quarter or 6 months or right before renewal. Like, it runs the gamut, but it's this frequency of connection. I think it's important for us to pause just a moment, and instead of talking about frequency of connection, to talk about, frequency of conversation, excuse me, and talk about depth of connection. Because depth of connection can happen whether you are working with an enterprise level business and talking every week, or whether you're working with an SMB business that you're talking to twice a year. Mm-hmm. Depth of connection is more about creating moments, listening very carefully, prioritizing your efforts, and reaching out and leading first, and having that conversation that helps you understand them more. That understanding can start with understanding the value that they see or don't see from your products and services. It can also be understanding their 5 p.m. to 9 a.m. So I think it's important for us to understand that, no matter if you're working with enterprise or SMB, yes, the amount of conversations that will happen will be different, but the depth of connection can be the same. And just unpacking this a bit more, normally when we talk about depth of connection, we are talking about what are the things that make us feel like we're bonded and we trust one another. And those are, number one, it's the amount of conversations or connections we're having. And it's also our shared experiences. So for those of us working with SMB customers, we're not going to have a ton of conversations happening. So we need to bond around our shared experiences and create depth of connection through those. And ways that you can do that is your shared experience is your product. Or your shared experiences. The last time you talked, you mentioned that you both had 4-year-old little girls and you were talking about, what's going on in their lives. So I'm being a bit verbose here and I don't want to derail.
That's great.
But I think when we talk about, the differences and how we engage, it's important for us to know, yes, there's amount of conversation, but that does not have to impact the depth of connection, which can still happen no matter how often we have those conversations.
Yeah, I think the depth of connection is also, so a couple of things I want to pick off there. Let's start with the depth of connection though. So the depth of connection there, when you're talking about your product, how do you judge that? How do you, put, this is obviously why you're creating your company right now, Quala, which is the difference between qualitative versus quantitative. And again, if you're thinking about, high touch versus high scale or low touch or whatever, the language that you might be using there, walk through that in terms of how you're thinking about the qualitative side of things, because that's not easy, especially as you think about just CX in general has this sort of stigma of being like, where do you start? Even listening to like Forrester's podcast, the CX podcast, which I listen to all the time, they're still having a hard time trying to say like, how do we get budget for this? Because they haven't actually figured out how to, what's the ROI on it. So I'd love to hear your thoughts more on that too, as to how do you build the qualitative side of things, and how do you judge the fact, that is something that is difficult to capture, versus the quantitative side, which is much easier with a high scale business where there's so much data, that's sitting behind that. And then we can pick up from there.
Yeah, sure. So it goes back to our conversation about the value the customers are experiencing. Value from product, to your point, which can be measured pretty much quantitatively, and then value from the relationships, which is the quantitative side. All of us on the call have likely worked with customers that used our products up until the very day that they churned. So the quantitative, it's not good for us to over-index on quantitative, no matter what type of companies we're working with, because there can be a danger zone in us not understanding that relationship connection or the qualitative side. It is difficult to unpack. There are some best practices that each of us can follow. How we've done it with Quala specifically, understanding that these two pieces are so important, is that no matter the type of business you're working with, there are some key questions that help us better understand the strength of our relationship and that bond and how that's impacting the health of our customer. And one way that, or in some ways that manifests, these are questions we all ask ourselves. They are things like, how happy are they with the level of support that they are getting today? Are they realizing the goals that they set out for themselves when we first began to work together? Do those goals still matter, and are they achieving them in the timeline they're looking to achieve them? Am I delivering what I said I would deliver from a PX perspective when I said I would deliver it? These are the qualitative questions that we are actively asking ourselves. How likely are they to renew? That in many cases, we have that tribal knowledge that's in, the specific CSM or the person working with the customer that doesn't get out. So how do we track answers to those questions over a time or over time, so that we can understand what are the major inflection points of how those questions are answered that are at the intersect of how customers are using our products. So what's the quantitative and qualitative together that equals a better understanding of how our customers are experiencing value, so that we understand what they need and we can stay close to them, and we can keep them using our products and services. And those are questions that no matter on you're on the enterprise side, having direct conversations weekly, or you're on the SMB side, all of us have our sort of like short list of customers that we prioritize. We make sure we have those conversations with. That's how to orient your conversation so that you understand the answers to those questions and can, again, log them over time.
Yeah, I think that's super important to understand and sort of pick into too, because you have, even still thinking about that, it's still thinking about it in terms of the customer perspective, but then there's the people that sit underneath the customer side. And in many cases, and this is again more towards the high touch side of things than the low touch, you have many people that are actually engaging, more on a human level, more on a person to person level inside of here, versus the SMB, where you have, less, you probably have a lot of users, and your connection to those folks is very different than if you're actually, driving through with a lot of, training and support in there. So then you have to think about the qualitative of, okay, how does the CSM feel? Which is kind of like what I love about what you've helped bring to Alyce as well, with what's the utilization of the product, because you can also take, the CX journey. And again, this is just, being a little bit geeky on the quantitative side. You can look at utilization of a product from just a quantitative perspective and say like, oh, this customer must be really happy because they're getting the value, out of the actual product, but they're missing the fact that just because somebody's using the product doesn't mean they're actually getting the value, on the other side of it, right? So I'd love you just to talk your perspective, since you're actually literally building a product around it, as to how do you get to the people aspect of that, deeper into that, to really get to those qualitative metrics that help you pull out what does it really mean and where do you really sit in terms of the emotional connection you're making in terms of CX.
I love this conversation. And I think the first thing I'll say is that you cannot circumvent the process. There is no easy shortcut way to building bonds, relationships, and trust with your customers. It takes time, it takes investment, it takes desire, it takes a good listener, all of those things. So I know that we have so many teams and people on the call today that are already doing this hard work. And unfortunately, in many cases, that insight just gets lost unless it's documented and tracked somewhere. So when it comes to, I used to call this, and this is not not my idea, this idea of matching socks. And so you have people on your team that are likely connected to maybe C-level or VP level, or some of the strategic versus tactical people, or maybe you are a CSM or support person of one, and you're connected to all of them together. It is incredibly important for us to follow the connections that we're having with not just the company overall and understanding how that impacts success, but the connections that we're having with the user specifically. If you have an amazing, amazing relationship with the user, I don't even like the word user, the person that's using your product on a daily basis, but you haven't been chatting with the person that makes the decisions and is actually purchasing your product, then that's a red flag. So it's important for us to have those connections, have an understanding of what the director versus VP versus manager is interested in, what the value is to them, and tracking against that value. I think a big mistake we make, as leaders, is we decide what our KPIs are and then we force those on our customer. So we say, we want to make sure people are using our product and creating X amount of campaigns, every 30 days. And then we force our customers to do that thing because we've decided that's what success equals, instead of listening and understanding how every person wants to experience value and what that means for them. It takes, like I said, time. But these conversations are already happening. So we built a tool like Koala so that you could notate and answer these assessment questions for each of the customers that are users that you're working with, people that you're working with, and understanding how that's affecting the health score in a simplistic way. Because at the end of the day, you're already doing a ton of work. This needs to be super simple.
How do you, so, as I'm listening to that, and you and I have talked about this before, so I'll just dig into some of the conversation. There's different levels of decision makers, and you talk about value, and just the reality is of the CX side of things. And the two things I want to sort of hit up on here, we'll cover this. The second thing is, like, we're talking very much on their already existing customer. I also want to make sure we cover like pre-customer, because I think it's important we talk about the relationships that you carry from pre-customer through, and how you actually make that happen, because the emotional bonding all happens here, and all of a sudden there's this usually like big cutoff point with a lot of companies. But let's go to the customer side of things. When you're in an existing customer, you have, in many cases, sometimes you won't even talk to the person who owns the budget, right? You're talking with folks that are, either like could be decision makers, but they're not the budget holders, where they have to go up the chain to be able to actually get approval on that. Procurement, whoever it might be, the users, right? They're admins that are actually, helping to facilitate, the value of the product that's in there. How do you usually drive, and what's a typical process that you actually think through in order to create that emotional resonance, or the PX, the personal experience with those specific folks? Like, is there some sort of a framework that you use? And we never really got into that part of the conversation before, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think my method, and I'm doing a lot of talking on this call, so it's already against my method, but it's doing a ton of listening. So the process that I follow is that when I first begin to talk with someone that might have an interest in a product or service, and this is even before Quala, this is my company before Quala called Promobox, I spent a good amount of time building the relationship, understanding them personally, what motivates them, what they're interested, their background, how they even came to the company that they're in today. And you can find little clues to create those bonds. Some examples of that might be, some customers have emailed me through their Gmail accounts, their personal accounts versus their company accounts. You can see their little icon there. Some of them, they're with their children, they have family photos. You're already getting subtle clues of what's important to them and what their life looks like outside of their day-to-day working job. I followed Alyce's lead. I included in my little tagline that I like to run, that I'm building an off-grid home in New Hampshire, solar powered, like these little things that make you. And I can't believe how many people just respond to that and ask like, oh my gosh, can I see pictures? What's going on? Or like, what type of running that you do? So I think if I was to boil it down, I would say it takes a good listener, and it takes someone that's willing to lead first. So if you're going to want to create a bond with your customers and your prospects, it's going to take you facilitating that or sharing first. And that can be really uncomfortable if you're not used to that. I think a lot of us take on our company persona or brand, and we apply that to ourselves, and we almost strip ourselves of our personalities, and we say, I am Koala. I'm not Sansi, I'm Koala. And I think that can be a very dangerous thing. I mean, you want to find companies where your PX matches the CX and your brands can be complementary. But I think it's very dangerous to assume the personality of just your brand and then lose your humanness that makes you and interesting. So I would say lead first, and it might be a little bit uncomfortable, but you'll find that people, follow suit. Sometimes I jokingly or lovingly call them Darth Vaders, where they're just not interested in following my lead. And that's okay. You mentioned being respectful and not oversharing. Like, you need to be very conscious and have like a high EQ to know if someone just doesn't, they're not ready. You can't facilitate or create a bond that someone doesn't want to help create. So I would say in those cases, I'm always respectful. And I don't go into like hyper Sansi mode. I used to like feel like, oh, they're not vibing with me, so let me like turn into this insanely enthusiastic, crazy version of myself to try to pull them out of their shell. That's a very dangerous. You'll notice that they like go into their self.
Totally.
So you got to be respectful, but I think, listening and leading first is incredibly important, and being Sherlock, looking for those tips that give you a sense of who they are and what's important to them.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's funny, right before this, we jumped on this webinar I shared around, and we have the Alyce Love channel in Slack. And it was a note from a random rep from one of our customers, just calling out one of the CSMs, just being like, she knows everything about me. It's like amazing. It's like, we feel like we're friends. And I think that goes right to the point of what you just said before, which is PX is not about being a chameleon. It's about finding common ground. It's about finding common ground and building trust around who you are as an individual person and what you need to accomplish. Like, what are the success factors? Like, people tend to forget in CX that you're both in it together. Like, somebody's taking a risk on you, and you're basically like, you're the risk on them, at the same time.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the relevance, right? The 9 to 5, right? The other side of it is like, they're actual human beings. And it's always funny, I always thought about this growing up, and you're always looking at like Steve Jobs, I used to like, fawn over him and, think about these folks and like Eddie Van Halen, because I'm a huge guitar fan. And that was like my original inspiration on this. And, I'm sitting there and I'm just like, oh my God, they're just amazing. And Cal Ripken was my like number one, idol growing up. Like, everything Cal Ripken did, I just wanted to be like that, even to the point that I lived literally halfway between New York City and Boston, and I was a Baltimore Orioles fan. So like, totally didn't make any sense, in terms of what I was doing there. But, I looked up to them, and you know what? I met Cal Ripken and I saw him, and it was at a Sirius XM conference in like 1999 or something, like super dating myself. Maybe it was 97 or something. I was like even younger. And I remember watching him, and he's like there for 5 hours, just like signing autographs, taking pictures the whole time. I'm like, he's just a normal person. Like, I still could not get any words out, after I met him, that was there, but whatever. Anyway, we're getting a little too much in the 5 to 9, but going back to like, the customer side of things, one of the things that really gets me and why I brought that story up about our customers, because, the relationship aspect, the deepness that you can actually have, the common ground that you can actually get on both sides of the coin can save you when something's going wrong in the 9 to 5. Yes. Right. So the what I used to call like they used to call them like the brand world, like, you have this bucket for your brand, like everybody understands and has like an emotional connection to the brand, but also you have like a bucket for yourself in terms of how emotionally connected you are with those individual people. And, we think about it in terms of, you have to first build rapport with anyone that you're inside the business with. Then you have to go and build trust, right? That's there because now actually you're trusting each other in terms of that thing. And then finally you get to the loyalty part where it's like, even if something's really going wrong, they're still going to stick with you, through thick and thin. And the deeper loyalty you can actually drive in the PX side, right? More people you can have trust inside the organization, especially as you go up the chain in terms of, decision-making power. That's going to help you, go through thick and thin. And we've had that with customers ourselves. Every company goes through this. It's like, if you're denying it, you're living in la la land there. So, but for real, like you have to understand that by building the personal experiences inside these organizations with individual people. And the more you have at that loyalty stage with them, the harder it's going to be for them to rip you out. Even if somebody else is coming in with like a backhoe, to try and take you out of there. So the question that I want to pose back to you, and just, part of this conversation is around, you mentioned Darth Vader, and you're mentioning, some of these folks. How do you deal with a situation like that when Darth Vader is kind of like against you up at the top and doesn't want to open up to you, but they're the one that you kind of have to break into?
Yeah. This is a difficult one. And I've had experiences where I've lost, and I had experiences where I won. I think the thing I would point out is that in the absence of a relationship, then the product driven value needs to carry. And in many cases, we have a relationship driven value and our product driven value. They go hand in hand. When one is experiencing frustration or there's a lack of value there, then the other one is meant to carry. So they work together. In times where I've had someone that I've had a really difficult ability to bond with, I usually lean back on the product driven value. And I talk a lot about, and again, we're always talking about our products and why we love them and why we hope customers will use them. But I go towards, okay, let's talk about the goals that you have. We don't have to get to know each other as much right now. We're not that comfortable with it. Let's fall back to really focusing on product driven value. And can I help build a rapport of trust and bonding through our mutual desire to get this product up and running? So that's been one way I've navigated through someone that just doesn't vibe with me, and I'm not going to vibe with everyone, and everyone's not going to vibe with me. So, that's one thing I've used. The other thing I've done is maybe also I'm not just the person to work one-on-one with this key stakeholder. Like sometimes, it's the love isn't there. And that's okay. Let's bring someone else that can do the job better than I can. And maybe that can help. So product driven value is one way to do it. Changing over a member of the team to get someone that you feel like can facilitate that bond a little bit better is another good way to go about it. In the times where I've lost the battle and the customer has churned or they've left, I remember just sharing candidly, this was 6 years ago, maybe. I was co-founder at a company called Promobox based in Boston, and we were building a company, and I was on the call with a major manufacturing brand, Electrolux. And it was a really, really frustrating call. They were frustrated with our team and our product. And we had this conversation where we talked about all the frustrations, or they got to share them. And I thought it went really well. Though I sensed that it wasn't a good call. No one wants to have these types of calls. I felt like I at least led it well. And then I got some back channel information from our key stakeholder who I have still a very close personal relationship with today, who said that his boss felt that I was condescending and that I wasn't listening to their problems. And that I wasn't willing to make a change that would help keep their business. And that was like, I still to this day, like it's so hard to hear. So you're not going to win everyone over. And I think the thing that's important for us to know, for us in the customer facing role, is that perception is reality. I can think that I'm a kind and generous person that that cares about understanding other people. But if that customer doesn't feel that I am, or there's this underlying tension, or it's just not happening for them, then I can't die on my hill of, I tried. Like, it really is important to understand their perception of the experience they're going through, and give voice to that, and see how you can make changes, whether they're product driven changes or maybe they're bringing someone else on board to help work through that flow with them.
How would you, digging into that to get a little more tactical on that, how would you actually be able to gather that perception? How would you be able to qualitative and quantitatively understand what that perception is? Do you ask questions? Are you, I know how I'd probably do it. I like having face-to-face conversations. But again, some people just turtle. They won't actually, talk to you about that. Obviously, you can back channel as much as you want, but if you only have one stakeholder there, that's your key champion.
Yeah.
How have you done that in the past?
Yeah. Two things I do is, number one, it's very important to have a one-on-one conversation. The call that we were on, there were 5 or 6 of us. So it's important to actually, there's that one person that's having frustration. They're the ones signing the check. They're the ones that you need to really, truly understand. At that point, we had everyone else. We really understood everyone else really well. So one mistake was it wasn't one-on-one. It really does need to be one-on-one. The other thing that I have been using over the past year since then that's worked really well for me is actually 2 things. One of them is I will talk about this idea of, look, this is all information, not ammunition. So we're not looking there's no blame. We just want to understand. And I share a thesis. So my thesis is, or I think what might be happening is, and then X, Y, and Z. I'll go through it. And then normally I do that. And I ask, does this feel true? Does it resonate? Do you agree or disagree? And usually I can sit back for, I'm not kidding, 60 or 90 minutes and just hear them talk. And I don't have to say anything. So that's something that I've done. Since the Brené Brown has come along, who talks a lot about vulnerability, and I love listening to her, I now have also said things like, really my worst fear is we go through this process and I still don't understand why you aren't able to realize the value, or why you aren't able to get what you need from our team. It's what keeps me up at night. It's my worst fear. And then move to a place of understanding with that statement. And it's just then all on the table.
Yeah, that's awesome. I want to come back to what I said, before, because I think, again, we've been very in the customer aspect of this. When you think about the personal relationships you're building and the connections, right? The depth of the connections you're building throughout the beginning phases, like the awareness phase, right? All the way through the decision and purchase phase before they're actually a customer. How do you view that, or what are the things that you've noticed from that first portion of this, and how people have done it, or customers, or companies have done it successfully, bridging the PX, carrying over that value, throughout the rest of the customer life cycle? And what problems have you seen too, in that?
Yeah. Some things that I've seen work well are, I've noticed teams that introduce, because we know that sales to CS handoff can be quite difficult. I've noticed some teams thoughtfully introducing the customer success manager or services manager earlier in the process. They are never signed any tasks. They don't need to do anything. They just basically join a few calls or one call, and that starts to build the rapport. So introducing them sooner. The other thing I've noticed teams doing is that they sort of bring in the CSM into the conversation, even if they're not present. And they will talk about, oh, you're going to love Sansi because, she's also feels like da, 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 da. So they're consistently referring to them. And then from a technical perspective, we all know that it's incredibly important to make sure that the tribal knowledge that's being amassed by the sales manager is captured somewhere in an easily digestible way that then can be passed to the CSM. So that notion of not only a knowledge handoff from a platform or tech or tool perspective, but also sort of introducing them into the conversation early. I will say, if all of that seems complicated and you're fighting some culture pieces in your organization, I would say the one thing to do is to make sure you understand exactly what values and goals that are important to the potential customer and make sure those are passed, because when the CSM joins the call for the very first time, they can at least say, hey, I've heard that these 3 things are incredibly important to you and you're looking to achieve them over the next 90 days. Is that still the case? And you start building the product value rapport and allow that to translate into the relationship.
Yeah, I would also say that so one of the biggest, downfalls I've seen from the companies that I've advised, and, even in Alyce and everything else that you start to see, is like you build all this rapport with these specific folks during the sales process. A lot of those personal experiences don't carry over in the rest of the experience, because now it's like, okay, here's the expected value that's been promised. Are you delivering that value in the rest of the customer experience, as you specifically go there? But the thing that can carry through is when those expectations are aligned. And like you just said, when you have here's the 3 things that I know that are super important to you, because at least the trust portion, right? The relevance of that is carried through. And then you can go back to building the relatability, which is the emotional connection back into the customer as you specifically drive into that, as well.
Yeah. It is not an easy thing to do. I think so many teams that we talk to are really focused on when the handoffs happen. How do we make sure that the customer doesn't feel that it's disjointed? And I think, to your point, you make good points of how we can help improve that, because they are going to be experiencing different members of the team in different ways. And I think if we can do an appropriate knowledge transfer, we can actually look at that as an extremely positive thing, because now they're experiencing a whole new facet of Alyce. It's like, cool, they get to work with this other person that has these other interests and these other experiencing and love these other things about the product. And that is going to hopefully translate into increased value for the customer themselves.
Yeah. What's funny is I was thinking back, you were saying the word humanized, right? And everybody always keeps throwing the word "ized" at the end. Even like it was funny. People say personal versus personalized, and then you're saying, I don't know, in the beginning when we started talking about how you have automation. Like, what are the portions that you can actually automate versus not? So, when I think of this, just to give my quick definition on this, there's a big difference between personalization versus being personal. All right. Personalization is about how you use data to actually drive somebody through a buyer's journey. That's really what it comes down to, and even a customer journey. As you go through it, because you're trying to get them to make the right decisions as you go through this. But it does not allow you to evoke emotional resonance with that person. And when you actually get into empathy, and when you get into, caring for the other person, and when you start thinking about, relatability and whatnot, you just can't get into that when you're dealing with how to actually be personal. And that's how you get to that moment. You have to have both of those aspects, because the personalization aspects of this, which, interestingly enough, have personal in it, to me is the wrong terminology for it, because when you're automating things and you say, oh yeah, I'm just swapping out hi first name, like there's no emotional connection to that. Right. Even if you're saying, hey, I noticed you've used X amount of our products, like that's not being personal, right? That's personalizing in terms of like you understanding and getting them through the actual, buyer's journey and through the customer journey. But that has nothing to do with you creating an emotional resonance, and that goes back to what, we've been talking about this whole time. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how do you take that step by step? What do you automate typically versus what do you actually, leave to humans, in a lot of these cases?
Yeah, I love this topic so much. You actually introduced the difference to me because I hadn't spent a lot of revs on it, and it definitely resonates. And I've spent some time thinking about it. The idea of personalization versus being personal. And I keep going back to that it has to be a give first mentality. It has to be you leading the charge. So I think about the moments that I've sent emails that are hi first name. And in those emails or notes, I have focused on being incredibly raw and talking about what I'm focused on, what I'm working on, what some of my fears are, how I hope to serve the community that I love, deeply love and appreciate and work for, and what sort of my goals around that are. So you can, number one, if it's feeling difficult and you're not sure exactly where to start with yourself. You can still use the little tokens and the fun little chats and all that good stuff, but like start with sharing something about yourself. It'll absolutely come back. When it comes back, you're going to be learning about the customer. Make sure you trap that somewhere when their birthday, like when's their birthday? Let's talk about birthdays for a second, actually, because I have a good illustration for this. We all, I think many of us get cards from our dentists for our birthday, which a lot of times are more depressing than they are exciting. I think we talked about this before.
Or scary.
Or scary, yeah. Because it's usually a version of this where it's like, hey, and then, I don't know if anyone can see this, like literally like, hey, from us all at Highland. Like, okay, that's, please don't bother, just save a tree. And then I have one for my hygienist, which is actually like, nah, right? Like, so I love this woman. I get to see her just twice a year. That's it, right? Although I hope, right? Don't people most go twice a year? I get to see her twice a year.
6 month clinics.
Okay, good. I was like, oh, did I just reveal something gross? So I see her twice a year, and Gloria's amazing. I get to know her. She's from Mexico. She's hanging out in Boston. Like, she's the best ever. And she writes these incredibly thoughtful cards for my birthday versus like The Office. You know what I mean? So like, it's a small thing, you know, that small businesses, obviously they're serving a ton of people. Like, it's a small thing to do. So when we talk about this idea of being personal, give first, share first about yourself, but make sure you are remembering these key tidbits that they're providing you, because they are, and it'll help you better bond with them.
Yeah, I think one last thing I'll say there, because I saw MK just pop back on here. When we think of moments, or you think of those moments like you just showed right there, there's two ways that you can invest into an interaction with somebody, or sometimes not even interaction, like touches. I hate that word, like more than anything in marketing and everything else. Like, it's just a creepy word, period. Like, people should stop using the word touches or touch, whatever. It should be either an interaction or it's a moment. And you can take it from a touch to an interaction to a moment where there's emotional connection, because it shows that you've invested one of two things, either time and or money, right? Into that specific thing. That card cost her money to actually send to you, and she obviously took time to actually make that happen. But they're not universally, synchronous there, right? Which is like, I don't have to only, invest time or money. And if I'm investing money, I also have to make sure that I'm investing the time. Because if I just throw something to you, for example, I'm like, I send me, chocolates, for example. I don't eat chocolates, right? But if you send me peanut butter, it'd be a different story. But it's something where you understand you've taken the time to actually make it relevant and relatable to that specific person. So just, again, there's the elements of that allow you to create emotional resonance. That is all about the investment you have with the actual person you're interacting with, as well.
I love that.
Nice.
Love it.
Well, thank you both so much for this.
We can keep going if you want.
I know.
And then we're going to run a beer and hot dog race. It's going to be amazing.
Your hot dog and peanut butter. It's going to be fantastic. Yes. But we did have some questions come in, and I think this helps to further illustrate what you were just talking about there, Greg, about building those relationships that are, relatable, respectful. And so Jenna actually asked a question about, how do you navigate customer relationships now, especially during the current, if anybody dialed in for the first episode where I said, now more than ever is my least favorite phrase, but we should obviously now give the current circumstances a nod. And how do you use personal experience to drive and deepen your relationships during these times?
Yeah,
I think I'll start with this one, and then Santi, you can take the next one. How about that?
Cool.
So, I think it's about empathy, right? This came up in one of the previous sessions that we were doing. I think Will Pringle had brought this up there. But the key thing around the current relationships is like, people say empathy, and I think that word is so overused. It's like transparency, and like it's such a buzzword right now, which drives me nuts. And I've actually said it like 12 times on this call, so I'm or on this session here. So, but what does that mean? It just means, like in layman's terms, putting yourself in the other person's shoes to understand what are they actually trying to accomplish. What situation are they actually in? And right now, because the 5 to 9 and the 9 to 5 blend so much, right? Like I literally have my daughter and my wife are locked in like 2 rooms away, and she's, playing Legos or whatever she might be playing right now, that's out there. Okay. Like, you have to understand what is the situation that people are in right now. And some people, like, you get to that point and you start to make a bond over that. Like that's a common thing that everybody has right now. You can create a personal experience easier now than you ever would be able to do before. You'd be like, Greg, you're in such a fancy little room. If I showed you the size of this room, I can touch the walls here and here. Like it's not big. It just looks fancy, just so I can be like super cool here. Usually I'm stuck in the attic, here as well. I got like crazy like skeletons that I'm hiding just to be like not like in a creepy room. Anyway, this is my wife's things. But that's how you connect with your customers right now, is you just have to get to like, a understanding of what their situation is, and then secondarily, what value can you actually provide to them? And especially if the product itself right now is not able to provide value, especially in hospitality or travel or some other things, it's like, how else can you provide value in any other way possible to be able to connect with them? That drives trust, that drives loyalty, as you go through the personal experience.
Yep. 100% give first. I wouldn't change anything about what you just said. I would add on that I had the pleasure of learning from a woman. Her name was Kelly. She was the head of dealer marketing at Chevrolet for many years. And she mentioned to me that relationships between Chevrolet and the dealer network, she looked at them as a bank. So she cannot make more withdrawals than she has money in the bank. She has to make deposits when she needs a withdrawal. At least she has some money in there. And it was so simple. I'm sure I don't know if she thought of this or what, but I latched onto it. And I think about it all the time. So, if you're asking something from your customers, but you don't have a balance, then there's a problem. So especially now, I know a lot of our balances are low. So make sure that you're giving first, and knowing that people don't have a lot of time right now, and they're dealing with a lot personally and professionally. So follow a give first mentality and know what's in the bank.
Yeah, I always had there's an anecdote told to me by like one of my first executive coaches in my like early 20s when I started my first company. And she told me, and she's like, and this came from somebody else, so it's from a famous CEO, so I'll give her credit, even though it's some other person. But they said that you have 2 jars every morning that you walk into. One is filled with marbles. And what you want to do by the end of the day is you want to have these 2 jars. And one is, what have I done for people? And the other one is, what have people done for me? You want to have as many of those marbles in what have I done for other people as much as possible every single day. And it's such a simple concept around that. But the more that you can be thinking about that and that give first mentality, it's so much easier, because when the ask does come, right? And like Gary Vaynerchuk talks about this, the jab, 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 right hook, right? Even though I'm lefty. Yeah. So it's like, that's the type of things that you have to be thinking about, especially at this time now, and not to use your phrase, MK, but like, that's just the way people should be. The beauty of this situation right now is that it's forcing people to be more human. In our case, what I like to say is, it's not about being human, because human is like adverse to like robot or the robot. It's like, how to be personal versus being impersonal. Like if you be personal, you create emotional resonance. Being human doesn't create emotional resonance. So if you can be personal with these folks and create the personal experience, then you actually create the bonds that get you through the time when the product may not be giving you the right value, there. And if the product can be given the right value, then you actually are able to, take advantage of opportunities like now.
Yeah.
Well said.
I love it. Well said.
We had another to both of those. We use the metaphor of the bank, or you use the metaphor of the jar. It doesn't matter which one, but you are going to be making an investment into that relationship. Yeah. Jenna had a follow-up question that was, how do you make those investments, those deposits in the bank, or move those marbles over at scale?
Yeah. So I think, yeah, sure. The at scale, I think, question is a really good one. So what I would say is, it is all about prioritization. So I know that you can't have a conversation with each one of your customers every single week. It's just not possible. Maybe you're managing hundreds or thousands of customers. So that's where your tools come in place. So you have something, hopefully, that helps you prioritize and understand what are the moments that need to be created today, tomorrow, over the next 30 days. And what should those moments look like? So of course, I would be remiss if I didn't say like why we created Koala, but there are a plethora of tools that you can use to understand what are those, how do I prioritize, whether it's from a health score perspective or revenue perspective or products perspective. And what are then the topics and assessments that I should be talking about and creating so that I can understand how to appropriately prioritize those conversations in the future. So that's what I would say, because you can't get to it all. So you got to have some help from a tool perspective.
Yeah, I think that's a good angle. I'll yes and that, which is if you go back to the actual prioritization of the personal experiences you're trying to create with people, like you can't talk to every single person. So you have to be able to prioritize what those moments are. But if you go back to what makes it a moment and how you can actually prioritize how you make those as impactful as possible, it goes back to, the 3 R's that we always talk about, which is like, how can you be relevant, meaning like you're actually adding value to the relevance of what their 9 to 5 is. How are you actually connecting with them and talking to them about like, hot dog runs and stuff like that, at that time, right? And then how you be respectful across all those different channels, as you're happening there. And like, again, Alyce, so, here's again, we're wrapping up Universe here, people. So you got to at least talk about Alyce once, come on, but with Alyce, that's the entire thing that we were talking about is like most people, and there's so much data and things you can capture on the 9 to 5, like what's happening there. And there's all qualitative, quantitative data that's happening there that allows you to build trust in terms of the value you're delivering to the customer. But the emotional resonance is super hard to scale. So with Alyce, which is why we built this in, is like and going back to the investing in the time and the money, if we're actually investing money and it's about the other person and it's about giving first, and then you can learn about them at that time, you can do it at scale instead of being like, well, what should I do to connect, personally relate to this person? Well, that's where Alyce comes into play. And that's why, it fundamentally changes the approach that people take to, sales and marketing and CS when they're actually using Alyce in a fashion to be able to invest in the right time, invest in there. Alyce does a lot of the grunt work behind the scenes, and then you can spend the time like making it you. And and learning about them. That's the key that's there. Now you've got this perfect moment that you can do at scale, and then you can prioritize based on your customer base, that's there as well.
100%. 100%.
2 more questions come in, and then I'll let you guys scoot off to your hot dog eating, I believe.
I know, we got to stop. Like, I don't think you eat hot dogs. Do you, Sonci?
I don't, but there are veggie dogs. So like, I'm down.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yes.
This was a meaty question that came in from Rob that said that, CX people as a rule have already drunk the Kool-Aid of, when it comes to building the importance and building those connections, building those moments with people. But how do you break through the different divisions with those siloed mentalities? Sales, marketing, and even billing all think their own little world, and sometimes even they think of their little world, but they don't necessarily see the big picture. They see that maybe as cumbersome. So is it A/B testing? Is that the best way to get through to these different groups? How do you get buy-in from the C-suite that take the lead in champion efforts? Is it a carrot and stick initiative?
Hey, Rob, I love this question. I'm happy to go first unless you.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I have several thoughts. Yeah. I want to try to distill. So I'm going to talk about it first from the CX perspective or the customer experience perspective, because we have people on the front lines chatting with our customers every single day that understand a lot of pain points, wins, and frustrations. They are customer experts and they have a ton of insights. Unfortunately, so much of that stays in that silo, to your point, Rob. So how do you make sure that everyone in the organization is a customer expert? How do they get access to those insights that will help them make better decisions when it comes to, having that more in personal, better PX experience, whether you're in billing or marketing or engineering a product or whatever. I have found, still working through this, but I have found that the best way to do that is for them to understand what's going on at a customer level. Whether you're doing film reviews with customers, whether you are sharing insights on Slack, there are a lot of good ways to do this, but I would say just start making sure that the customer facing teams are on the front lines, that someone is sort of bubbling up what they're learning and translating that in a way that makes sense for billing, that makes sense for sales, et cetera. This is culture driven too. You need to, of course, be a part of a culture that cares about delivering amazing PX and CX, which let's assume we all do. Since everyone wants to do that, we need to deliver the insights they need to act accordingly. And a lot of times those insights are lost. So make sure that you are capturing the insights somewhere that you're learning. that customer facing teams are learning, and making sure that gets to everyone else, because they're all leaders in their own right and they know what to do with that information.
I'll just add a small thing to that because I saw the other questions come in here. So the one other thing is that's from the vendor side. If you think about it from the customer side, right, and how you connect, how you want to be connecting, the customer just goes back to what we talked about, previous or earlier in the session. Yeah, each person has a different need. Like a procurement person is not there to be like an asshole to you, right? They're there to be able to, like, they have a job to do, right? And they're hired because they're trying to like lower, the cost, to the company, and they get commissioned on that, or they get paid on that in most cases. So like they have a different need and requirement, and you can connect on them on that level, in a different way than you would, versus the billing person, right? That you're waiting to try and get paid from, from AP or whatever it is, versus the user, versus the, the decision maker or the budget holders and stuff. So like, you just have to like look at them first and map that out as to what actually they want, and then be able to like start attacking that, and then again, how do you do that at scale? Well, you start to actually recognize patterns by specializing in industries or other things, as you go through and build out these teams, because then you start to recognize patterns and you can start to actually like, foreshadow what problems these folks might actually have. And it totally depends on the maturity of an organization. Like a 3M or like, a Salesforce or something, they have that on lockstep. They know exactly like what to do, when they bring somebody on, they're running them through an entire, training program that's there. So.
Good points.
Nice. All right. Final question, and then we'll get back to delivering PX everywhere we go. But final question came in from Courtney. Courtney's question is, how do you ensure that you aren't sacrificing the personal/customer experience for the sake of moving with agility and speed? I know a lot of teams, especially teams I'm like partnering with on the marketing side, or just people I'm trying to brainstorm with, we're all trying to move in so many different directions. We kind of feel like, like marbles just kind of shooting, ricocheting off each other. How do you preserve that experience?
So I think there's a few nuggets in there that you should pull out. One of the nuggets is going back to what you said, Sonciary around prioritization. You just have to understand there's only a certain amount of hours in a day, and you have to be able to understand what is your objective that you have to actually drive through. And for customers or for companies where they have, prioritized customers, which just happens in most companies, especially as you segment and you start getting into these different levels, you're just going to have a different amount of time being able to be devoted to different level of customers. Like you just said, Sansi, before, like if I've got 10 customers or 3 customers, it's vastly different, or even one, vastly different in terms of the relationships and the amount that I can, build into there versus, these customers where you might have 1,000, that's there. So you have to prioritize how can you ensure that you're building those connections, and how you're ensuring you're delivering the value at each one of those specific points. The second thing is like tactically, then how do you make sure you're not sacrificing, the customer experience, is again, just iterating and calling it out. Like if you just map out what the customer experience is, which I think is something that I've seen 15 different ways that people have done that up to this point, you can start to pick out where are the gaps, right? What are the gaps where you're actually dropping the ball in terms of how you do that? And then you prioritize which ones can you actually make, more important in terms of this. Where do I need human intervention here versus where I can actually use, stuff. You can't have a perfect human moment or person to person moment every single time. You've got to choose which of those are going to be the most impactful as you specifically go.
Yeah. That's such a good point. I think the only thing I would add to that is my own personal experience. I was on a call with Chaz. Hey, Chaz, I don't know if you're on today. And we were chatting about some key things that really needed to get done. And the call it was intense in the way that we knew that we only had so much time to figure out an answer to a problem. And at the end of the call, Chaz was like, hey, I have 5 minutes. If you have 5, would love to just chat. And now that we figured out the solution, I'm like, sure. And I love what he did here. I'm learning so much from your team. He was like, hey, I know that was a lot for us to chat about. Maybe we could just take 5 minutes and I can see how are you doing? Are you cool? I know we had a big problem to solve. I think we solved it. Do you feel good about it? And it was just this very nice moment that we could have that was after all the crap that we had to experience that was, to get this problem solved, where we could remind ourselves that it's that we're friends, that it's about this connection, that we figured out the solution, and have a nice personal moment. And then I went on with my day and I felt really good. But if we would have just ended the call, I would have maybe had some residual oh, that was intense. Glad that we fixed that. And I would have moved on. but instead we just took a few minutes because he asked for it. And we had, a quick little debrief. How are you doing? That happened. And then I went happily along with my day and felt great. So I wouldn't underestimate the small moments that you can take after you've been sort of racing to get something done in hyperdrive to sort of check back in with the internal team or check back in with a key stakeholder and have that moment.
I love that, Chaz. I don't think he's on right now, but we'll send him the recording. We'll send him a bunch of snaps in the Slack for delivering that moment. And you kind of encapsulated exactly what we need to do moving forward. And it's to care about the human on the other side and the fact that there are emotions. We're not robots here. There are emotions that we can lean into, both good, positive, bad as well too, that we can just be more relatable. We can treat each other with that respect and make sure that whatever we do, it is relevant at any given time. Sansi and Greg, I want to thank you both so much for such a powerful session. I also want to thank the 11 people who shared their 5 to 9 passions with us on Monday with 5 to 9 Fest, and the 20 other people throughout the week who have shared their expertise, their passions, their brains, their love for what they do with us here at YOUniverse. If you are at all interested in catching up on some sessions you may have missed, we have everything recorded, and actually we're putting it on there as soon as we can. So every session except for this session actually is back on the YOUniverse page where you signed up. So go, please enjoy. It's open, it's ungated. We just want everybody to learn and understand how to make a difference by delivering personal experience. Thank you for everybody who's stayed on, dialed into this. Awesome week, guys. I am so excited by what we've been able to accomplish.
And also turn back to you, MK, and Nina specifically for driving and emceeing this, and awesome job, just killer. Yeah. And Sansi, awesome to talk as always.
Yeah, you guys are amazing. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I love all of you.
Thanks.
Right back at you.
All right.
Bye, guys.
Bye.